Hashem, today doing Daf Nunchet Amud Bet. We are holding on the very, very last line of Daf Nunchet Amud Aleph. So we're kind of in the middle of a sugya here. The Gemara wanted to prove, we brought a machloket Rav and Shmuel, whether yesh chuppah lepsulot or ein chuppah lepsulot, if chuppah will be posel a lady from having truma. For example, if a kohen has just chuppah with a grusha who was a bat kohen, is she allowed to have truma or not after that chuppah? Does it posel her? Yes or no? So that was a machloket. The Gemara we ended off Rav Sheshet, wanted to prove from a Braita, from a Mishnah really, that yesh chuppah lepsulot, that chuppah would be posel. Right, and we brought a Braita, we brought a Mishnah. The Mishnah said a case of a sota, who the sota makes a swear that she didn't do anything when she was arusa, nisua, shomeret yavam, and kenusa. So the case that we're focusing on is arusa, when before she's married, when she just has kiddushin, she swears she didn't do anything. So the Gemara is trying to figure out what that case is, because a sota doesn't drink water if she's just an arusa. Has to be that she's married, because the pasuk says tachar ishech. So the Gemara goes through, and the Gemara determines the cases that you have to say that first they had bia biznut, not for the purpose of chuppah, because if they had bia for the purpose of chuppah, then she'd already be considered nisua, and the halacha is that you have to have bia with the husband first in order for the sota waters to work. So the case is first he was mekadesh a lady, then they had bia in her father's house biznut, and then she was with somebody else, or he warned her not to go with somebody else, and there was a fear that she was with somebody else, and then he had chuppah with her, but they didn't have bia yet, and then he fed her the sota water. That's the case. So the Gemara says, okay, very bottom line, de kavata gabe shomeret yavam sheba alea yavam bebet chamia. What the case by shomeret yavam also is going to be that her husband passed away, so she falls to yibum to the brother, but she's living at her father's house, and the yavam, you want to say that the yavam was with her in her father's house, and then she was with somebody else in the interim. Like what? How does that case work? If that's the case, if he was with her, for purposes of znut in her father's house when she was a shomeret yavam, so shomeret yavam karitla, that lady you're calling a shomeret yavam ishto ma'al yahi, she's considered 100% his wife, because once he does yibum, even for the purposes of znut, it's still considered a good yibum, like we learned in the Mishnah in the beginning of the parak. Boker Tov. Rav kana lakol, because Rav holds that even when there's a bia of mezid or shogeg or ones, he's koneh 100%, and she's fully his wife. So the Gemara says kiddush Shmuel. Damar lo kana el dvarim hamurim b'parsha. So the Gemara says, no, this is going according to Shmuel, that Shmuel holds that when there's a bia of ones or mezid, like for the purpose of znutu yavama, he's koneh her only with regard to the things that it says in the parsha, which means to be yorish, the brother, and that she's ptura from yibum v'chalitza, but not that they're, not 100% kinyan. So the Gemara says, no, that doesn't make sense. What are we discussing? We're discussing the opinion of yesh chuppah lepsulot. Who is that opinion of? Rav. So you can't say this is going like Shmuel. And midi hutama el Rav. We're explaining in Rav. And ha'ama Rav kana lakol. Rav holds that even with a bia of shogeg or mezid or ones, he's koneh lakol. So that would mean that you can't explain that the case of a sota who's a shomeret yavam is that her husband died, she falls to yibum, and the guy has a bia with her for the purpose of znut, and then he warns her not to go with somebody else, and she's with somebody else. That can't be a case of a sota of shomeret yavam, because once they had a bia, even though it's a bia of znut and not for the purpose of yibum, but that's it. They're married. So the Gemara has to explain. The case is that you're right. There's no bia. He does ma'amar. Okay. Ubeit Shammai, and we're going according to the opinion of Beit Shammai. The Amri ma'amar kone kinyan gamur. They hold ma'amar is a complete kinyan, meaning ma'amar is the same as making it as if she's mikudesha to him. Meaning, according to Beit Shammai, once the guy does ma'amar, he does kiddushin to his yevama, she is now halachically considered like a mikudesha to him. And now, in that case, he does bia. So basically, the Gemara is explaining the cases like this. The guy, the case of Shomeret Yavam Sota is as follows. The husband passes away. She falls to Yibum to the brother. The brother does ma'amar. Now, she's considered mikudesha to him. And now they have a bia of znut. That bia of znut won't accomplish yibum now because, according to Beit Shammai, when he does ma'amar, that's a kiddushin. She's considered a mikudeshet, and bia of znut will not accomplish anything at that point. And then it's the same as arusa that we had. Then she goes. Then he warns her not to go with somebody else, and she's suspected of going with somebody else, and then he does chuppah, so it's considered tachali sheikh, but he doesn't have bia because he's not allowed to have bia with her, and then he feeds her the water. The Gemara says that's the case. So the Gemara says, okay, arusa. If that's the case, so that's the same thing as arusa. Why do we need you to say arusa and shomeret yavam? If we're going according to the opinion that ma'amar makes her into an arusa 100%, so then why do you need to mention arusa and shomeret yavam? This is just the same thing as arusa. So the Gemara says, Ulta'amech nesua knusa lav chada miltahi. The Gemara says, okay, well, either way, according to what we're saying, nisua and kinusa is the same thing. Nisua is somebody who had nisuin and they got married. Kinusa is somebody who did yibum. At the end of the day, after the fact, they both have the same status. So why are we mentioning both? Ela nisua dide uknusa dechaver. Nisua means someone that the guy chose himself and got married to, and kinusa is he got married through yibum. So achanami arusa dide v'shomeret yavam dechavre. I have no problem saying arusa and shomeret yavam is also the same thing. Arusa is somebody who he was mikadesh on his own, and shomeret yavam is a case where she fell to him to yibum and he did ma'amar. But at the end of the day, they both have the same status, true, but they're both different ways of getting to that status. Okay, Rav Papa Amar Haitanahu. Rav Papa says, back to the Mishnah of Sota that we said that she doesn't case of Sota of Arusa that we wanted to prove Yesh Chuppah L'Psulot, that if he just has chuppah with her and he doesn't have bia with her, he can feed her the Sota water. Right? Rav Papa says, we got the whole case wrong. What do we explain the case was? We explained the case was that he first is Mekadesh a lady, and then he warns her, don't go with this guy. He has bia with her for znut, not for chuppah. He has a bia of znut with her.
The main husband.
Yeah. There's only over here we're not talking about yibum anymore. We're talking about an arusa. So one guy, he's Mekadesh a lady. He has bia with her, biznut. So they're not considered. There's no chuppah yet, but he had bia with her first, and then he warns her, "Don't go with this guy." She's suspected of going with that guy, and then he has chuppah with her. He's not allowed to have bia with her after she's suspected of going with the guy. He has chuppah with her, and then he feeds her the water because he has to. Feeding the water has to be after chuppah. That's what we wanted to explain.
What's the status
So
of
Rav,
the lady?
what's your question?
When she said the kiddushin with the guy, and the guy do the zanut with her, okay? What's the status of the lady that time?
If she's in this case, she's just suspected.
She's suspected.
The husband is not allowed to. The husband is no. She's still an esherish. The husband is not allowed to be with her though, after she's suspected of being with somebody else. So that's why he only does chuppah, and then um, and then feeds her the sota water. But either way, Rav Papa says that this is going according to a different opinion. Rav Papa Amar Haitanahu. This Mishnah is going according to the opinion of the following Tana. The Tanya. En mekanin la larusa la hashkotak shi arusa. You cannot, there's no way that you can warn an arusa, someone who just has kiddushin, to give her to drink when she's still in arusa. Aval mekanin ota la hashkotak shi nisua. But you can give her a warning. You can warn her not to be with somebody when she's in arusa and feed her when she's in nisua. But how can you feed her when she's in nisua? You can't have bia with her to make her into a nisua. So this opinion holds that's not a problem. Meaning you're allowed to feed her water, the sota water, even though you didn't have bia with her first. Right, I think that's how Rashi explains. 1 second. Right, I think this Tana doesn't hold. Right, the case is that he gave her sota water after Nisua, and he was with her afterwards. So this Tana doesn't hold that is an issue. Okay, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says Al Yedei Gilgul. The case is through a Gilgul, which means he made her make a Gilgul Shavua. Really, originally, he was suspecting her of something much further down the line. They were already married. They've been married for a few years. He warned her not to go with somebody. He suspected her of going. She was caught being in seclusion. Did they do something? Did they not? We have to find out. We take her to drink the sota water. And once she's swearing that she didn't do anything then, so he says to her, and also swear that you didn't do when you were arusa. So he's not warning her or anything when she's in arusa. It's all happening afterwards, but he's relating it back to beforehand and making her swear on beforehand. It's a gilgul. So therefore you have no proof that we're talking about a case where he did chuppah without bia. That's the point. According to these two answers, we're not talking about a case where he did chuppah without bia, so you have no proof to the machloket Rav and Shmuel, yesh chuppah lipsulot or not. Okay. Says the Gemara further. Shalach Rav Chanina mishmei de Rabbi Yochanan. Haoseh ma'amar bevimto ve'esh lo ach. Afilu hu kohen ve'i kohenet pasla mina teruma. So Rav Chanina sent a letter in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that had the following psak. He claimed that Rabbi Yochanan gave the following psak. Someone did ma'amar, and he has a brother. So a lady falls to yibum to two brothers. And let's say they're even all Kohanim. The brothers are Kohanim, the lady is a Kohanet. Okay? So she falls to Yibum to those two Kohanim, those two brothers. One of them does Ma'amar. Once one of them does Ma'amar, that's it. She cannot have Truma anymore. Why? So, yeah, there's nothing wrong here. She's not a Grusha. She's an Almanah. She's Muteret to marry a Kohen. So Rabbi Yochanan says, you can't have Truma. Why not? So, we were in the Mishnah, the previous Mishnah, we had a case of Mishtameret leBia Psula, that she is awaiting a bia that she's not allowed to have. So in this scenario, once she falls to Yibum, she has a connection. She's awaiting bia from one of the two brothers, from either one of them. Once one brother does Ma'amar, now the second brother, that they're still mideoraita zika. She's still connected to both of them and is still awaiting a bia from either one of them. But now, bia from the second brother would be asur midurabanan, because once the first brother did ma'amar, there's an isur durabanan to be with the second brother. So since she's in that state where she did ma'amar and didn't fully do a yibum yet, but she's still connected to the second brother also, because Ma'amar is only a Durabanan thing, Midoraita, she's still connected to the second brother, so she's viewed as Mishtameret leBia Psula. She's still awaiting a bia from either brother, and a bia from one of them, from the second one who didn't do Ma'amar, would be Asur Midurabanan. So that scenario makes her Psula to have Teruma. So says the Gemara, Leman, who is this psak going according to? Ilem Rabbi Meir. If you want to say that it's going according to Rabbi Meir, who we had in the previous Mishnah, Damar Rabbi Meir mishtamer libya emar Damar Rabbi Meir mishtamer libya psula lo achla. That which Rabbi Meir says that if she's awaiting, she's engaged to be married, she's betrothed to let's say you have a grusha who's betrothed to a kohen or something like that, that she doesn't eat. That's mideoraita. That's when the bia is asur mideoraita. Derabanan mi'amar. He never said in our, like a case by us where like one brother did ma'amar and she's still connected to the other brother, where that bia would be asur derabanan. He never said that that case makes her psula to have truma. Rabbi Meir was talking about a case of mishtamer lebia psula mideoraita, that she's awaiting a bia that would be asur mideoraita. Over here, she's not. It's just a bia that would be asur miderabanan. Vel Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon. You want to say it's going according to Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon? They even allow someone who's awaiting a bia that's asura mideoraita. For sure, our case where one brother did ma'amar and she's still connected to the other brother, where she's considered mishtamer lebia psula b'derabanan, for sure they would allow. So this psak of Rabbi Yochanan isn't necessarily going like Rabbi Meir, and it's for sure not going like Rabbi Yehuda, like Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon. So Ella, rather, says the Gemara, Kiata Ravin, when Ravin came, he explained the halacha as follows. He had a little bit of a different version of this halacha from Rabbi Yochanan. Amar, Asaba ma'amar bivimto, divrei kol achla. If one person did ma'amar, one brother did ma'amar to Yevamot, she's allowed to eat, because it's not considered mishtamer lebia psula, because it's only derabanan according to Rabbi Meir, and according to Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, everybody would agree in such a case that she would be allowed to eat truma. What's the case where there's a machla? Well, yesh lo ach chalal divrei kol eina ochelet. If she falls to yibum to two brothers, one of them is a kohen, one of them is a chalal. I say they both share a father. The father had one child that was, from a wife that he was muteret to, and he had another child from a grusha. So there are two brothers. One is a kohen, one is a halal, and a lady falls to them to yibum. So in that case, everyone agrees that eina ochelet. Why? Because she's mishtameret lebia psula. She's connected to both of these brothers, and one of them is a brother who that bia is pasul to, because he's a halal. So lo nichleku ela shenatan la get. The case where there's a machloket is when he gave her a get, meaning a lady falls to somebody for yibum and he gives her a get. Okay? So the question is she, if let's say she's a kohenet, is she allowed to have truma or not? So Rabbi Yochanan Amar ochelet. Rabbi Yochanan says she can eat truma in that case. Reish Lakish Amar eina ochelet. Reish Lakish says no, she cannot eat. So Gemara is going to explain this machloket. Rabbi Yochanan Amar ochelet. Afilu Rabbi Meir damar eina ochelet. Hanimili mishtamer lebia psula deoraita. Right? Now that he gave her a get, so he's not allowed to have bia with her. So according to Rabbi Meir, but there's still a zika. She still requires chalitza. So case is, right, a lady falls to yibum, the guy gives her a get, so they're not allowed to have bia anymore. They're not allowed to do yibum anymore, and she still requires chalitza. There's still a connection. So Rabbi Yochanan says that according to Rabbi Meir, she doesn't eat truma. Why? Because she's still considered mishtamer lebia psula. She's connected to him for a bia, and they're not allowed to have bia, but that's only midrabanan that they're not allowed to have bia. Right? Aval derabanan achla, bia psula derabanan, she's allowed to eat. Reish Lakish Amar, Reish Lakish says, eina ochelet, she doesn't eat truma. Afilu Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, Damri Ochelet, even according to Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon, that they say she eats truma if she's mishtamer lebi absula. Hani mili deish la'achid makom acher. That's only when this if this scenario were to happen to a different person, she would be able to eat. But in this case, a man giving a get to a woman doesn't allow her to eat truma. Right? A man giving a get to a woman in a different scenario doesn't feed her truma. So lo, in this case, he also won't feed her truma. She is a bat kohen. So the Gemara is going to ask. Well, let's read one more line. And there is a scenario of a get being able to feed a lady truma when she's a chozeret. What's chozeret? Chozeret means that she returns to her father's house. She's a bat kohen. She marries somebody, and he gives her a get. She goes back to her father's house, and she's able to have truma. So why don't we say over here she fell to yibum? The guy gives her a get, so the get could feed her she could eat truma. No, yesh l'ha'achila b'chozeret. Once we find that a get is able to accomplish feeding truma, so also over here we should say that the get is able to accomplish a feeding of truma, and she should be able to eat truma even after the get. So the Gemara says no, there's a difference. Chozeret paska mine v'krova levei nasha. By a case of chozeret, by a case of a lady who was married and then gets a get, so she's disconnected from the husband and she returns fully to her father's house. And once she returns to her father's house, she has the status of a bat kohen again, and she can eat truma. Avalha agidabe. But this case where she fell to Yavam and the Yavam gives her a get, the get doesn't disconnect them fully. She still requires chalitza. So this get doesn't make it that they're no longer. Yes, but if he does give a get, he's not allowed to have bia with her anymore, but she still requires chalitza. Meaning, if the guy does give a get, right, let's say he did. No, it makes it that they can no longer have yibum. No. Even if he gives a get, the truth is we didn't do these. This is the part that came out over Pesach. We missed a few dapim. We're gonna have to go back at some point and do those dapim. But that's in the 5th parak. It gets into this. Okay, let's try to do until the Mishnah if we can. Let's try to do a few more minutes. So says the Gemara, Nit'armilu o nitgarshu. So we had a case in the Mishnah that if a kohen was betrothed to a almana, to a kohen gadol was mikudeshet to an almana, or a kohen was mikudeshet to a grusha. So we had a machloket whether she's allowed to have truma or not. Machloket Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon. But everyone agreed nit'armilu o nitgarshu, if the man dies or divorces her. So if they only had kiddushin, now she goes back to being able to eat truma. There was no issue, meaning she just had the grusha, just had kiddushin to a kohen, and then she went back. No, the case is, let's clarify the case. Case is that you have, let's just pick a grusha and kohen, yeah? So you have a grusha who was mikudesha to a kohen, okay? So we have machloket, in that case, is she allowed to eat truma or not? When there's kiddushin and the time comes that it's his responsibility to feed her, is she allowed to eat truma or not? The kiddushin is chal. Kiddushin works. The question is just right by chayve. But only time kiddushin is not tofes is by chayve kritut. By chayve lavin, kiddushin is tofes. So if a kohen is mekadesh a gerusha, she's considered an eshadish. They're considered married. She's considered the children are chalalim. The bia is asur midioraita, right? So the case is that he's mekadesh this gerusha, and we said in the Mishnah that according to everybody, if if nit almana or nit garsha, if she became an almana or a grusha after that, she's allowed to have truma because she didn't do any bia of isur. But if they got fully married and there was a bia and then she became a grush, then she became pasul to have truma. Once there was a bia of isur, that makes her a halala. That's pasul to have truma. So. Ba'a minei Rabbi Chia bar Yosef mishmuel Kohen gadol shekidesh ata ktana ubagra tachtav ma'u. So the truth is, the next Mishnah is going to explain that the Kohen Gadol, not a regular Kohen, Kohen Gadol, has to take a betula, and that's what the Torah says. She has to take a betula, and also she has to be not a bogeret. She has to be young, that the betulim didn't, not even part of it.
Beautiful.
Young meaning at least a na'ara, ktana or a na'ara. She cannot be what's called a bogeret. Bogeret is 6 months after she becomes a na'ara, she becomes a bogeret. So let's say he did kiddushin to this lady when she was a na'ara, and then or a ktana, doesn't make a difference. And afterwards, ubagra tachtav, and then afterwards, when it comes time for chuppah, she becomes a bogeret. So what's the halacha? Mao. What's the halacha? Batar nisuin azlin or batar erusin azlin? Do we say that we go after nisuin and it's asur, he cannot have nisuin with her because she's now a bogeret? Or do we say batar erusin azlin and we go after erusin, and at the time of erusin, at the time of kiddushin, she was a ketana, and that's good. So Amar le tinitua. So he said, Rabbi Shmuel, right? Rabbi Chia bar Yosef asked Shmuel. Yeah, so Shmuel said that tinitua, we learned it in our Mishnah. We learned that, if one of these ladies who is engaged, she just has kiddushin and she gets divorced, that didn't affect her. But if she had nisuin and she got divorced, so that affects her. So the Gemara says, what are you talking? We're trying to prove from there that it's the nisuin that does it. We go after the nisuin. So the Gemara says, no. Amar le, Rabbi Chia bar Abba said to Rabbi Chia bar Yosef said to Shmuel that l'shavya chalala lo kame bayali. I'm not asking whether or not she becomes a chalala. Meaning that I know de bia hi de mishavya chalala. That by bia, at the time of bia, she becomes a chalala. Meaning, if there was just kiddushin between the Kohen Gadol and the Almana, or the Kohen and the Grusha, and then he divorced her, that everybody agrees that didn't make her a chalala. It's the bia that made her a chalala. So that I know we go after nisuin. It has to be bia to make her a chalala, that she can't have truma anymore. That's not what I'm asking. Ki kame bayali, what am I asking? Vu isha b'ftula yikach. The pasuk says that the Kohen Gadol has to marry a bitula. So my kicha, when it says yikach, is it the kiddushin ba'inan or kicha de nisuin ba'inan? So my kicha de kiddushin ba'inan or kicha de nisuin ba'inan? Does the Torah mean he has to be mekadesh her when she's a betula, but meaning before she's a bogeret? But if she becomes a bogeret, he can still do the nisuin, or no, the nisuin also has to be before she becomes a bogeret. That's the question. So Amar le, so Shmuel said to Manami tinitua. We also learned this. Where do we learn this? So ires et almana. If you have a kohen, regular kohen, who he does erusin to an almana. So kohen is allowed to marry an almana. He does erusin to an almana, and then v'nitmaneh liot kohen gadol. And then after he was mekadesh, the kohen was mekadesh his almana. Now they pick him to be kohen gadol. He was elected to be the kohen gadol. So what do we say? A kohen gadol is not allowed to marry an almana. Is he allowed to go through with the marriage or no? So we say yichnos. He's allowed to continue the marriage as long as he was mekadesh her beheter. He's allowed to continue the marriage. So the Gemara says no. So what do we see? We see that by a kohen gadol marrying an almana, as long as the kiddushin was beheter, the nisuin is fine, right? So the Gemara says no. Shani hatam dichtiv yikach isha. Over there we have a special drasha to teach me that the pasuk says yikach isha. It could have just said yikach. It says yikach isha. We learn from there this halacha. We're going to come to it in a couple of dapim. That if the kohen marries a he's Mekadesh and Almana, and then he becomes a Kohen Gadol, he's allowed to continue.
Before making Kiddushin for the Almanah, he was a Kohen. Not a Kohen Gadol.
Right. So the Kiddushin was Beheter. The Kiddushin was Beheter. Now the Chuppah is that's allowed because the Kiddushin was Beheter. By the time of Chuppah, he became Kohen Gadol. So the Gemara says that's allowed. We have a drasha for that. So the Gemara says, Achanamik Tivisha. So why don't we use that drasha for here too? By the case of a Bogeret, he was Mikadesh her when she was a Ketana, and then afterwards she became a Bogeret. So the Kiddushin was Beheter. Afterwards she became a Bogeret. Use the same drasha to teach me that case would be mutar also, because the Kiddushin was Beheter, and you could go through with the Chuppah. Even though at the time of Chuppah, she becomes Asura to the Kohen Gadol, because now she's no longer a Ketana, she's a Bogeret. She's no longer a Nara either. So the Gemara says, Achat velo shtaim. You can only use this drasha for one thing, not for two things. Okay, umarait. Well, how come you're choosing to include the case where he was Mekadesh and Almana as a Kohen, and then the scenario changed and then he became Kohen Gadol before Chuppah? And why aren't we including the case? Why don't we choose to learn the case where he was Mekadesh her as a Ketana and then she became a Bogeret? So the Gemara says, Ha ishtani gufa, v'halo ishtani gufa. One case, the case where she becomes a Bogeret, there's physical changes in her body. The case of the Kohen to the Kohen who was Mekadesh and Almana, and then he became a Kohen Gadol, there's no physical changes to anybody's body. So we're including the case where there's less change happening. There's no physical changes to her body, but we don't include the case where there's physical changes to her body. Okay.